So forgive me. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. A land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalapuya Ilihi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation.
Good job. Okay.
It'll get better and better and different and different. All right. And officially the meeting is beginning with agenda and materials review. Is there any adjustments we'd like to make to the agenda?
Nope.
Right. Minutes approval from November meeting. We don't have minutes from January because it was only training. Are there any adjustments to make to the minutes?
I wasn't there, so I can abstain from making a motion.
I move to approve the minutes. Do I need to do that?
We do, right? We have to move in a second.
You do have to move in a second. Apologize. Sorry.
Alan was there and Alan read them and he'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
We got seconds and thirds all around, so I think can say that the minutes are approved.
You can, it's
Fine.
fine.
It's,
You have to-
well, I mean,
Okay,
Rick
it's
is the
fine.
only person who has it, so
Everything's fine.
you approve?
Yes.
I do too. There we go. I told my coworkers they should come and see me be super awkward, and I don't think they believe me.
Watch a police commission meeting, you'll figure out exactly how Robert's rules work.
Oh,
for-
I like to keep it the Carolyn's rule. It was fine. All right, comments from board members and commission liaisons. This is fun because we'll just go around the circle. And Alan, you were over there, so you'll be after Clay. Like in the olden days.
Yeah.
Like keep
You don't have to write a list.
So we are electing new human rights liaison and commissioners.
Yeah, but that's later.
I know,
Okay.
but as of now, we have Jose, no, Alan as
And
and Jose.
Mhm.
We aren't going to hear from the Human Rights Commission, but Alan maybe from the police, and we do have a police commission person here too.
Thank you.
Hey, do you have anything to say tonight?
No, I'm just glad to be in person. I like in-person meetings a lot, and I'm glad to hear that we're doing a land acknowledgement. It's something that I'm trying to infuse in our architecture department too, so appreciate that.
Alan, it's your
Yeah,
turn.
Alan, you're next.
Do you have any?
Well, yeah, I can report on the police commission has met twice since the CRB has last met. So there, there is a report. And at the last meeting, we considered the police commission considered the policy relating to the stop data collection. And we had Lieutenant Tinseth within the last year or 15 months during my tenure on the CRB reporting on the same policy. And at that time, I didn't hear the auditor complaint, or at the time, the acting auditor complained that she was troubled with the reporting. The blue team entry is made, and you see the auditor sees the bias if there's the whole relating the reporting obligation. And Lieutenant Tinseth reported to both us and to police commission that it functions really well and the officers are really on top of it. And so that was the one policy. And then the second is, I think this is important. I had Leah distribute a policy item from the police commission 2 meetings ago. And it's a policy change. And I wanted to bring it to your attention for 2 reasons. One, because it was this board, not a few members, and many newer members, I think, weren't part of it, but this board made the recommendation to have changes made to this policy. And I just wanted to point out that, in fact, the police department and the police commission took that up and did make changes. And then so that it matters, and that when we weigh in on policies, even if that's not strictly a review, it still is something that is important. And the second thing is that there's this policy 807.2. It's just that one page, and it's just that one line: as a reasonable use of force during crowd control activities. The department is proposing putting that in, and this involves the use of the ASP batons, the PR-24 impact weapon, and a straight baton. So these are things that you strike people with. And the discussion is around the very next, the B, the paragraph B says they should not be used to strike persons engaged only in passive resistance. So there's a discussion going on about, well, as a reasonable use of force, crowd control, you could have a crowd that needs controlling, but people are involved in passive resistance. So I would urge, if you have an individual opinion, I think you should express it to the police commission, or attend and give your opinion. Or it's pretty basic. Like, I don't think it would require wordsmithing, but we could affirm our support that we don't believe that impact weapons, ASP batons, PR-24s, and straight batons should be used against passive resistors. We don't have to do that, but it is something that I think this is important, and it kind of slides under the radar if it doesn't, isn't brought out. So that's it. That's my liaison report. I would, engage a discussion if anyone's interested, but if not, you have the information, and you can act on it individually, of course. So thank you.
I'm not sure that we've
Yeah.
got what you're talking about, Ellen, because the only thing I see is extended range impact weapons should not be used. It doesn't talk about.
Alan,
Like-
I think the printing or something happened with the text. So the pages that had comments on them didn't get printed correctly. Are you talking about
807.2.
807? Okay, .2.
It's
I'll make sure- I'm
807.
gonna-
It's 807.2, use of impact weapons.
Yeah.
And it was just a 2-page PDF, and it is a comment that it shows up in my PDF as blue with a strike through. As a reasonable use of force during crowd control activities is what they're proposing to add to 807.2A. And that's what the police commit. I think there will be support to not be in favor of that. I can't, the police commission, there certainly were commissioners that are troubled by that. And if you can't see it, it's not very useful to discuss it. And if there aren't copies there for all of you, again, it's not very useful to discuss it. So we'll make sure that you get it by email, and you can weigh in. We can't meet, the police commission meets before the CRB meets next. So if the material's not available now, it's not. So
I think Lindsay may have just found it. Lindsay found it. So I think we've got it. We've got it now. Thank you, Alan, for your patience on that.
sure.
I think it was something with the tax changes made it hard for it to come through.
Your turn. Okay, I wasn't sure if we were gonna wait. I guess we could probably discuss it further at 7 if we wanted to. Yeah, when we talk about elections. I'm glad we're meeting in person. I'm sorry I missed the November meeting. I was reading the notes and I was like, oh, wait, I wasn't there. So I couldn't really vote on it. I appreciate starting with what you started with. I just like to acknowledge that 164 years ago today, Oregon was founded as a state, and I appreciate that we get to meet on a day where this all got started. I think it's pretty important to recognize those things. Also, February is a day that, I think it was 2 days ago, that we lost an officer who was in IA when I first started on the Civilian Review Board, Jerry Weber. He was a fine officer, and he is still greatly missed. So.
I have no comment.
I normally don't have any comments, but I will just say that, one, I'm grateful that Alan is being our voice on the police commission. I didn't know that these policy changes were happening before our November meeting. I think I was asking a lot of questions, pointing out issues that I think they already recognized clearly. Well, actually, continuing on this, I was going to say that I do support, I don't know if the board at large supports, but I do support striking out as a reasonable use of force during crowd activities. That was kind of like the main theme of my questionings in November.
I don't have any comments except a reminder to the board that our main objective here is to maintain transparent and fair representation of what we are as civilians able to see, and we are the only 7 civilians in the state that get to see this sort of thing. So it's important and special that we get to do that. So we need to maintain that by fulfilling our end of the bargain by keeping things confidential, and that includes anything that could identify an officer, including name, or gender, or rank, or nickname, or height, weight, anything. So I just want to keep everybody on task with that, and a reminder that we need to be very, very aware of that in all of our meetings, including tonight. Any public comment? So we can take public comment from the internet and also from the real world. You can raise your little blue hand if you have a public comment, or your flesh hand. Flesh hand? Wow. Okay. Okay. It's lemonade. All right, I don't see any public comments. So we can move on to the training topic. Can you introduce our trainer?
I can. Thank you, Deputy Chief Adams, for coming to talk to us about vehicle pursuits.
Yeah, I'm gonna come up here so you guys have
thank you.
not craning your head around and look at me.
Thank you. So pursuits have been, for those of you who knew Mark was very passionate about vehicle pursuits and never having them. And so the pursuit policy has sort of evolved over the years. We're seeing a couple more of them. So I was excited to bring you this case tonight, and I was excited to have a training so we can all be really clear on where the policy is and why. Does that sound good?
Yeah, you bet. So, instead of getting the minutia of about a 10-page policy, just to kind of hit the high points, we have a restrictive no pursuit policy. So generally we do not pursue outside of some exceptions to that. And those are in place because of legislative requirements for mandatory arrest. And some are in part in decision-making on what do we do to keep the community safe versus, the risk for apprehension. So to talk generally about pursuits, in order to engage a pursuit, there's several factors that must come into play. And for us, that would be a violent felony crime, a person-to-person crime, for example, assault, robbery, homicide. Those would all be felony violent crimes that would trigger the ability to engage in a pursuit. And then there's the other ones that we talk about, which is a legislative type of requirement. And most of that revolves around domestic violence cases. So what is often forgot is, as law enforcement officers, we have a statutory requirement to, if we're investigating a domestic violence crime, to identify the aggressor or the perpetrator and make that arrest. And that's a requirement. And so if you expand that, we get behind a car of a domestic violence suspect and they run, and we have a duty to capture that person. And so that's one of the things we look at, but it's not just necessarily the legislative requirement on that. If we're talking about domestic violence crime and a stalking and similar events, then there's the need to protect the victim of these crimes and actually stop the individual. So there's actual extra emphasis on wanting to engage into a pursuit under those circumstances. And one of the nuanced ones that's just been a recent add is when we have a reckless or a DUI driver that's, we see driving through the city, we may have citizen reports, and we get behind it and we try to stop this car and it's driving all over the road and then it takes off. So what we've done is we've allowed some limited ability to engage in a pursuit under those circumstances. With the thought process behind that is we're already seeing reckless behavior. Our community is already in danger. Let's try to stop that from occurring by engaging in this pursuit. None of anything that I've talked about alleviates an officer from the duty of care. And so if you review the policy and if you've seen it, there's language in there that refers to at all times in order to engage in a pursuit or continue in a pursuit, an officer must always be mindful of what's the need to apprehend the person versus the risk created to the community. And that's the weighing that goes on inside the car and with our supervisors and with our officers within a pursuit. And so at any point where the risk of damage to our community outrisks the need to apprehend, then we're terminating those pursuits. Either the officer is terminating or a supervisor that may be monitoring would terminate that pursuit. And none of those exceptions that I talked about, the officer still has to adhere to that. So if I'm behind a felony suspect that just did an assault, I still have to pay attention to, is the need to apprehend this person greater than the risk created to the community. So, and those are important things that are instilled in our training from the very first day, and they're continued all throughout. And they're also adhered to and reemphasized through command directives and from the chief of police all the way on down, that if you're going to engage in a vehicle pursuit, these are the things that we need to be mindful of and aware of. And just because, wait a minute, he did a felony crime, I can chase him. No. You don't have that ability. You still have to do that constant weighing and evaluating. And that's how we try to balance the safety of our community versus, I guess, the other side of the safety is the apprehension of violent offenders. So in a nutshell, that's kind of really what our pursuit policy is engaged in. Oh, and I apologize. One of the other additions we added to our pursuit policy was the ability to continue a pursuit after a tire deflation device, a TDD, or in our case, stop sticks are deployed. And if you're not familiar with the stop sticks, you throw them out in front of a car, they drive over it, the spikes go in the tire, and it slowly deflates the tire. And that's an important distinction because sometimes you think about, I'm going to throw a spike underneath the car and the tire goes pop and the car goes careening out of control. These devices are designed to slowly let air out of a tire so a driver does not lose control while they're driving that car. And so the policy revision there and the decision point was, at the moment we're deploying tire deflation devices, we are engaging in, first of all, some form of force. It's not a physical force or otherwise, but there is some application there. And the other piece to that is, at the moment that we do it, as a city, we've incurred some sense of liability and a need to apprehend and continue with that, because now we have somebody driving down the road with deflated tires. They're not going to get up to speed, so our speeds are reduced, and we should be able to continue and engage in that. So that's one of the other changes that we've made to policy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When did this start with training policy? When did the training start on that policy?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, it looks like the policy was put in on 12/23 of 22.
Mm-hmm.
Did training start before that or after?
Training has been ongoing. So we have been talking about these training revisions prior to this directive or this policy being published. So
would an officer be responsible for abiding by the policy before 2023, 22?
Not for this policy, no. But that's the latest revision of this policy, and the one that would be, and if I can extrapolate your question here,
yeah,
the policy that would have been in place prior to this still would have allowed for a pursuit for a felony suspect on an assault case. The only revisions that we've added recently had to do with the reckless driving, the DUI drivers, and the tire deflation devices. Those are the most recent ones that we would see in the 12/23.
Thank you.
I'll let Alan go first. He's
Oh,
behind you.
Alan does have his hand up.
Sorry, Alan.
No, hey, no problem. I'm not visible anyway. No, thank you. Thank you. I just have a quick question. I saw in the policy that the pit maneuver training was supposed to be annual, and I just want to know, does that happen? And is that happening? And is the department current on the auto defensive maneuver kind of training? Thank you.
Alan, I would have to verify and double check just to be sure. We train every discipline every quarter. We had EVOC training in the last quarter of last year, I believe, and we should have refreshed on pit training. But I'll have to get back and I will confirm that and I will share it with Leah so she can share it out.
Sure. And just if I could just follow up, would you have an expectation that patrol officers out on patrol have had pit training, or is that something that's in progress, or is it should happen as they rotate through training?
So every officer is trained in pit upon being hired by this police department. So you receive initial training in your pit maneuver and all your EVOC driving, and you're certified. You'll go to the academy and you'll be certified at the academy again. And then we come back, and that's when we get into our quarterly training. So absolutely, without a doubt, the expectation is you would not engage in a pit maneuver unless you're trained in that maneuver and currently certified.
Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pursuit intervention technique. That's pit.
No, the EVOC.
Oh, EVOC. Sorry. Emergency vehicle operations course. EVOC.
Thank you.
My question was along the same vein, like how often are they getting this training? You said quarterly. Okay.
So that's every survival skill. So the intent of the department is we want to train defensive tactics, confrontation simulations, our driving. The intent is to train it every quarter. Now, of course, the incidents of the past 2 years with COVID and some of our staffing shortages have impacted that. But where and when we are deficient, we will bring it back up. So
I should mention that DC Adams has been really great about saying, hey, would CRB be interested in doing more vehicle, like fun driving training, pit training, things like that. So always
as passengers?
No.
As veterans?
No, they didn't let us drive.
They didn't let you drive?
No, they
never
didn't.
mind. Sorry, that's up to him. I should say, never mind. I didn't answer that. It's up to him.
So Lindsay and I were talking ahead of time, and not to take some of the board's time here, but we were talking ahead of time about, you know, how do we provide training that's meaningful and relevant to you? And very candidly, and I don't know what the liability of that looks like, but having you in the driver's seat and feel what it feels like to have that pit maneuver placed upon you and to actually try to do it. Super valuable. I think when you see it from different perspectives, you understand, because I will tell you, when you first look at it, it does look daunting and it's scary. And you think, oh my gosh, what are we doing? But when you actually are sitting in the car and you get pitted, you're like, wait a minute, that really was nothing. And so, you know, if it's done properly and it's done effectively, it's a very safe technique. And I think we don't even consider it a use of force under 30 miles an hour, at least back, I hate to date myself, but back when I was being trained, you know, it was somewhere in that range. So, you know, it would be looking ahead, you know, to just kind of building blocks off what we provided with the use of force and the simulation training, just to try to get you guys some different exposures to different things. But Lindsay says you have a list of things that you're interested in. She's going to share that with me. We'll get back together with our trainers and see what we can come up with and what you guys would be interested in participating with, and what, you know, case specific, like, you know, what can we do training wise that will help with some of the cases you're reviewing, if any. And I don't know if that's the case, but I think the dialogue and the things that we're discussing here are important. So continue that.
I should say I did it a long time ago. We can't talk about it. But,
He wouldn't let us drive. I just know he wouldn't let us drive.
But it was really interesting. Like it's somewhat like we did last month, right? Like it's always just really interesting to put yourself in different shoes and or different cars or whatever. Yeah. So, but yeah, we're here to facilitate and make sure that you guys get what you're interested in. So that would be helpful.
Is there a speed that which pit is used or is not used? Too high, too low?
Yeah, and I would have to, and I would refer to policy here, but I think above 35 miles an hour or 45 miles an hour, it's considered a deadly use of force. So at a certain speed, then we consider it deadly use of force, simply because the forced rotation of the car and the things that are happening, it's difficult to account for all factors. Terminal velocity will kick in and people can be severely injured. So I believe it's 45 or 40 miles an hour. We consider it deadly force above that.
That it can be used at low level speeds as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, and it could be used at that level, just if deadly force is just.
Absolutely. Spot on.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A pretty easy group.
You didn't have to hold the sign up either.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, you were supposed to hold that.
Thank you for your participation.
All right.
Case review time. Steve, would you like to join us at the table for this, or you?
I'm happy to sit and listen.
No,
If
for
you have
sure,
any
that we
questions,
can
I'm
see
happy
it.
to-
Ellen, can you see the CRB case summary slides, or are you still looking at the screen?
I'm
with
still
all of our
looking at
cases?
all of your smiling faces.
Okay, just
However,
like
I have the packet so I could track Rob. Yeah, don't sweat it. Don't worry about it.
All
So
we
we
have
want
to do
the-
is just go back to
we
Zoom and then
want
at
the
the
public to see
bottom,
it.
hit like share screen. Yeah, there you go. You can just hit the green, that part. Yeah, there you go.
Super. We're speeding. We don't have a
I'm
break.
like that.
It's good. I'm gonna break
There it is.
Whichever one you wanna use. And Amanda did.
All right, Ellen, how about now?
We have Rob's screen. Yes, we have it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You walking us through this? Are you walking us through? Oh, Rob's doing it.
Okay,
Oh.
so for our case review, it has allegations of improper vehicle pursuit, report submission, and forcible stop. So here we go. Summary of facts. So Officer A was on duty and observed a white Buick Century driven by the involved citizen. Officer A observed the path of travel for the Buick Century and saw the vehicle make erratic movements.
Sorry, if you hit that one, that should make it go.
Sorry, I'm technical.
First time for all of us. Figuring that out.
I don't think we actually told you.
Okay,
But
okay.
Yeah.
All good.
Okay,
I think I made it clear.
back on script. So Officer A conducted a records check for the license plate of the Buick Century and learned it was reported stolen. Officer A requested assistance from a communications specialist and confirmed the Buick Century was reported stolen. Officer A continued to follow the Buick Century, but he or she did not immediately initiate a traffic stop. Officer A requested assistance from other officers. Officer A then activated his or her vehicle's emergency lights and initiated traffic stop on the stolen vehicle. The involved citizen did not stop the Buick Century after the emergency light activation and continued driving. Officer B arrived, observed the traffic stop evasion, and struck the Buick Century with his or her patrol vehicle.
Is it this one? Yeah. Are you on the? Sure. It's just separating your screen into two separate ones, so, sorry.
I'm gonna check that out. All right, technical difficulties. The involved citizen continued to evade law enforcement and did not stop the Buick Century at the officer's request. Officer A and Officer C pursued the involved citizen Buick Century. Moments later, the involved citizen crashed the Buick Century and was arrested by officers. During an IA interview, Officer A stated he or she continued the pursuit because he or she believed that the Buick Century struck Officer B's vehicle. During an IA interview, Officer B stated that he or she attempted to block the involved citizen Buick Century from eluding Officer A. And then during an I interview, Officer C stated that he or she engaged in the pursuit of the involved citizen Buick Century based on the radio traffic of a rammed vehicle. During an I interview, Sergeant D acknowledged responsibility for the pursuit and stated the pursuit policy needed revision.
Just click on that and then click your arrow, that it'll move the screen.
All right. So allegations for Officer A. So 814 vehicle pursuits that Officer A initiated, conducted a vehicle pursuit in violation of policy when the risk posed to the public was greater than the need for apprehension. And then also 103.5.22 report evidence submission that Officer A failed to submit a true and accurate and complete report when he or she wrote his or her report and probable cause affidavit that the suspect vehicle had rammed Officer B's vehicle when the opposite was true.
You hit the forward arrow, it should work. I don't know. Try pushing that one. Yep. And then pushing your forward arrow. Gotta push that button every time too, apparently. Your computer has gremlins. Okay, yeah.
This all worked in one.
Totally
It's
did.
the owls messing it up.
Oh,
Hopefully no. I don't think it's the owl. Me. Yeah, no, try it. Yep. Here we go.
Okay.
Good job.
I did 4 steps each time. So allegations, Officer B, forcible stops. That Officer B attempted a forcible stop of a vehicle in violation of policy.
Yay, we did it.
I know the order for the 4 steps now. So. But now my screen's gone. Okay, so allegations for Officer C. 814 vehicle pursuits that Officer C engaged in a vehicle pursuit in violation of policy when the risk posed to the public was greater than the need for apprehension. Only a couple more and then we'll end this panel.
Push that one again. I don't know why it's making you do that. It's really weird.
All right. So, and then allegations, Sergeant D, 14.2.2 vehicle pursuits, Sergeant D failed to terminate a vehicle pursuit in violation of policy. Okay. And then so the adjudication recommendations, I'm not going to read all of these. You guys can see them up there since there's quite a few. But there was some disagreement for Officer A and Officer B. And then Officer C and Sergeant D. We had agreement here.
a clarification question. Was Sergeant D's allegation sustained No, it wasn't. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Insufficient.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think actually, I think we were agreed on B and C, but not on A. But I could be wrong. I'm gonna defer actually.
Yeah. C also.
Yeah.
C, B, and D.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
And then the issues for the CRB discussion. Oh, there. And it was an internally generated complaint. And then there are the policies and the summary of the adjudication recommendations.
We just filtered through, Rob.
You did it.
Yeah.
And then we got to see the casebook stuff. That's on the last slide, right?
Oh.
Yes.
Those are the three that we talked about.
Right. Okay. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all good.
That's okay. Perfect. All right, so we will start with the complaint intake classification and monitoring. So this is basically saying, we're not talking about the adjudications yet. We're just talking about the investigations and how it was.
Yep.
We started with Clay. So, could we get the screen back on the owl so we can see?
Sure. We can try.
Alan, I guess Alan's another. You can just.
Alan, you're gonna talk first.
Alan, you're gonna go first.
All right, I'm gonna go first on the issue, on this first issue. My only comment is to commend, I believe, Sergeant E for making, and I'm color terrible, blue team, and it's correct. It's the blue entry. Yes. So the sergeant who recognized that a extremely busy time of day, a wet roadway in the core of downtown represented something that should be looked at. That is showing that it's working, at least with regard to the operation of vehicles. And so I commend that. And then the investigation itself was very thorough by IA and also by the auditor. So those are my comments. Thank you.
I had a question during I guess it's part of the classification, the intake, but a couple of the officers mentioned that they had a 60-day objection.
Yeah.
That was a question.
Oh, what?
Well, I mean, what's the 60-day objection that, and
I don't remember, so there's, I don't remember what specifically that one was on that one, I don't know if you remember, but it has to do with when the actual event took place versus how long it took for them to be notified. And there's, in the ordinance, there's a 60-day window there that we have to have notification, otherwise it's not considered something that we can proceed forward on.
okay, so
And I think that's what that one was in particular, but I can't recall off the top of my head.
because it happened December 20th and it was opened on March 22nd. So I guess my question was, what was the big delay between that? Because I've kind of gotten to the point where any use of force, and I think hitting the car with your car is a use of force. How did it take that long?
Yeah, that was a rough time. So no, so it's always also different with pursuits because they go through, like they get entered in as a pursuit, and then there's a pursuit review, right? So that was included in the investigative report. And so it's one of the things that we kind of need to straighten up is do we open it as an IA before we get that pursuit review back? Do we open it later? And this is, and it's also sort of, especially with pursuits, it's kind of been more of an art than a science when it turns into an IA from a pursuit review, right? Because there are pursuits that get reviewed, even outside policy pursuits that get reviewed, that don't really rise to the level of misconduct, right? They stay in the pursuit review realm and they get dealt with that way, and that's fine. There are also some that we watch and we're like, oh, that appears to be something more serious, right? And so it's kind of like I said, more of an art and a science. And so sometimes that takes time. Just sometimes it's we're waiting for the pursuit review. I don't honestly remember what the timeliness was on this. I will take a significant responsibility for that because when this happened was December. I was still alone. And it was so without going into
it's fine. I just
yeah, I think that was me.
Because two people mentioned it,
Right.
That they had an objection based on the 60 days, and that objection was noted. It obviously didn't affect the investigation.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in that, you know, there's plenty of video for everybody to be able to look at and audio to listen to. And so it didn't really, I think, affect anybody's memory or ability to be interviewed. So it sounds like it's more at the back end that anyone that whether we sustain it or the chief sustains it, it's more that they can have an issue, a union complaint issue as to whether or not they can be whatever.
Yeah, they're basically preserving the issue for appeal.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
To use lawyer language.
Okay. I thought that's what it was, but then I thought it does, but it doesn't. When you said the 60 days had to do with the ordinance as opposed to the union contract, that's where I kind of wondered, because it's like, if we're not reviewing it, but I mean, if we didn't review it, but an IA still happened and it went through the chain of command, there could still be some kind of reprimand.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, and there's some deadlines in the ordinance for me, like as far as when I need to get something entered, and then there are deadlines in the contracts and in the protocols, right? So there's a lot of different deadlines in play, and I honestly can't remember which meeting was that issue here.
Okay. Yeah. No, I didn't have an issue with the intake or the classification. It just that this seemed like the best place to ask the question about 60 days. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
I agree with Alan.
I also agree with Alan. I think this is definitely not the first internally generated complaint, so that demonstrates that the officers in the city have integrity. At least the ones that are making the complaints. I continuing on with Bernadette's line of questioning, how did that get resolved? Was it just a reserved for appeal and nothing happened? Like it didn't impact?
Yeah, to my knowledge, nothing has happened unless you've received anything, chief. It happens often, and I don't know, again, I don't know the specifics as to what their reasoning was for the 60 days, but I can say historically, sometimes there's 60 days for minor misconduct and there's 6 months for major misconduct. And the union sometimes feels like they would consider this minor misconduct. And so they're basically putting in their objection. I think that's what it was. They're putting in their objection for the fact that it's over that 60-day window and they don't feel like it's major misconduct, it could be 6 months.
The only other 60-day timeline is how long the investigation it's supposed to be completed within 60 days. So, and I don't know if this one to see how long the investigation took, but
November of 22.
Well, that was adjudication, right?
Completed in November of 22.
That's a different.
Yeah, that's different. That's after it's been adjudicated into America.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you both. Yes, sorry, that was it. Now I remember. Sorry. That definitely happens, and it's sort of. I have sole authority to classify, right? And often people don't agree with that, and that's fine. You know, I think everybody gets their own opinions, but yeah, I think that was one of the things in play here.
All right, I agree that I like the allegation classification. I have some questions though. The officer muted at a time that didn't seem like necessarily practical to me, but I think that was maybe before the muting policy was in place. Is that?
Yeah,
is that true?
I mean, that's what I recall. And the muting has been, there's been a directive, right? Or no? Where are we on the muting?
It's a bargainable.
Bargainable. Okay,
So
we're still.
it'd be a mandatory subject of bargaining that we have to still undergo. But I've made my position on this pretty clear, and so we just need to work through some of the details.
Okay.
Because as you can imagine, a labor group would see that restrictive of a muting policy, which actually across the spectrum of policies around this is fairly restrictive, not wholly restrictive. would subject their membership to increased discipline, and so then it's a mandate.
Do you recall if this took place after you had given the suggestion or directive?
This is, that's a good question. I don't know. It all runs together because we're talking about this is December of 21, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. the answer.
Yeah.
I know it was around then.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I would say with the muting and bringing a violation on that, I'm assuming that's where you're going. I think I appreciate the feedback on that, because I tend to go with if it's sort of egregious, if something substantive is missed because of it, those types of things, because it's still in place.
I'm sure we'll get into my concern about this later on in the discussion, but my concern has to do with the next thing that I have to say with Officer A and truthfulness. Okay. When I started on the board, I was talking about truthfulness a lot, and it's kind of fun to come back to it. Because I have concerns about the truthfulness of Officer A, and I feel that had they not muted and had their supervisor not muted in the field, maybe my concerns would not be there, because I would have been able to hear that conversation and hear the kind of the processing of, because the supervisor said, what happened?
Right.
And then they muted and said what happened. So to me, that, I mean, maybe I don't understand the tact, yeah. But it seems like this already happened. Like, you're not strategizing. There's no reason to not share with the people who listen. What you're talking about when it already happened. Am I wrong about that, Brian? For tactical meeting?
I mean, I wouldn't consider that a time where you would consider that.
Yeah. Okay. Could it be a supervisory conversation?
Yeah. That's what I was thinking, more protective conversation.
Discussion.
Why is that? Why did we make
There was a reprimand that was being issued. That is a result of that, and that would be a reason for meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's not. I heard to assume that she was being reprimanded. Oh, God.
Sorry. That's right. Fair point. I think, and that would go to the supervisors meeting, right? If not the involved officers. I appreciate this discussion, and I think one thing that comes to mind for me is just you mentioned with the tactical meeting that they're not discussing strategy going forward, right? Tactical meeting can also include, here's this strategy that I had in my head, right? And so I think it still can be something that is legitimately meant to be confidential. I'm not saying that happened in this case, but I'm just saying
we don't know. That's my
right,
point.
exactly. We don't know, and in general, that is a possibility. But again, we don't.
All right, so that all being said, and I'm sure, like I said, we're going to circle back to this. Those would be my only allegation suggestions. But I do understand that you don't want to pile on allegations, and yeah, I just want to bring that up.
No, this is, I love hearing feedback.
Like,
Just one turn.
No, it's all right. I'm gonna withdraw.
Appreciate it. Okay. I don't have anything to add, but agree with a number of things that have been said.
Okay. Now we can talk about policy and training. Right?
Yeah.
Policy and procedure and training.
Yes.
And we will start with Bernadette on this.
Okay. I don't really have anything to say with regards to Officer C and Sergeant D. I don't think there's really anything for us to discuss about those. But I appreciate that they were brought into the whole thing here, just to give context. And I think this is one of those cases where it's like we're looking at a 2.5 minute at the most, incident. And so the conversation afterwards to me wasn't as important, because it's something not related to, I think, I can't imagine any conversation that would have given us anything for this, but I've been surprised by things in the past. My biggest concern with this is that this supplemental report didn't get written until July and really seemed to be triggered by, hey, could you please do a supplemental report? And in the criminal field, there's a thing called civil compromise. And I feel like this is a civil compromise where if a defendant does something wrong to somebody and they say, oh, you're right, I stole your bike, it's gone now. How about I give you $500? And the theft goes away. They all go to court and say, hey, never mind, it's all taken care of. Victim says, I'm happy. Defendant walks out without any criminal charges and everybody is happy. And I feel like that's what's happening here. And I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I think it was, I don't think that the officer that intentionally lied in their report. And granted, when we're watching these videos, we already kind of know what's happening, right? Depending on how you do it. I mean, it's like, sometimes I just watch the videos first, so I don't know what to expect. Sometimes I read the reports, you know, so it kind of is a little different, but the video is of the car's view. And so when the officer follows the car, after lighting the car up, follows the car out into traffic, and the camera's pointed in the direction that the car is going, how the officer didn't see this car, another police car, come over and hit that car, not get hit by that car, is really kind of baffling to me, and instead relied on a very brief comment that was really hard to hear about ramming. And so it seems a bit disingenuous that they thought that the suspect vehicle rammed the police car, given the trajectory of everything. And so I'm really disappointed that that one was dismissed, was not sustained. With regards to Officer B, I appreciate that one was sustained. It's always interesting to me. Everybody knows I like to see how long people have been with the force. That Officer A had the least amount of time. Officer B had about 8 years, and the one officer, Officer C, is the one that probably was at EPD when the whole policy was getting rewritten, that was to the standard that we are today. And so was probably doing pursuits when it was a little bit more of a free-for-all. So I find it interesting that the person that really understood we need to back off was the person with the most experience. But I guess that's not surprising either, because we hope that people with experience recognize the problems that are happening with these pursuits. I think it was also Officer B's driving, not just the ramming the car, but then going down and looking like they're going to go through like this little spot up on the sidewalk with pedestrians there. And then looking like, are they going to drive the wrong way? And by that time, you could see there were lots of cars around. I mean, lots of red and blue lights flashing. So, and then there was a lot of profanity as officer was trying to figure out the way around. Yeah, I mean, not surprising. I mean, and I don't have a problem with profanity. I won't use it tonight, but so I appreciate the policies. I appreciate the update in the policies. I appreciate that Officer C recognized this is something that needs to just stop. I also appreciate that Sergeant D didn't even realize there was a pursuit going on to say terminated. And I don't think we're at the point where we're saying your sergeant has to okay a pursuit. But it almost seems like I hope that that's not where we have to go with the policy. So anyway, I think I've said everything I needed to say in one sentence.
With all due respect, I do have a lot of respect.
Okay.
You had the pleasure of being able to sit in your living room with your computer and look at this and know what the charges were ahead of time. And so you knew exactly what the issues were. This officer was operating a vehicle that was in pursuit, and the whole thing made from that point, when the B hit the suspect vehicle until the suspect vehicle crashed, was probably no more than a minute and a half. That's a pretty short period of time for them to really be able to digest everything and be able to, or you'd be able to criticize their truthfulness. I put myself in that position also, and I thought, why did that officer see that car hit the other one? And then
put myself again through it. And it struck me that it looked like B was going to actually stop the car by pushing it. And I think B believed that that person would stop the vehicle when that vehicle was struck by B. And the whole thing kind of rocked me a bit. And it led me to believe that I might have been hit too when I was watching. So I think that it's the same situation in every case that gets tried in Lane County Court or any other court, where the issue is reasonableness of care. And the issue is whether or not you have a right to look with hindsight and in the light of after effects to be able to determine whether or not someone exercised the right judgment on the circumstances. And the whole thing was less than a minute, and I don't see anybody can make a decision about that in that period of time. And when you're in a position like A was at that time, if that was what seemed like it happened to you, then you're going to be reinforced by someone calling out on the radio that it was a ramming situation. And even though people got confused about who rammed who, it still was easy to step aside and criticize that person. That was a scary situation, and even though it was only a minute, it was something that was not like that. So that's just my judgment. While I questioned the first time I looked at the allegations, what the truthfulness issue was, it could be that your claim that the 729 supplementary report was hooked up later, but there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence that someone said to her, you need to put in another supplementary report.
Oh, there was a memo that Sergeant Nelson wrote saying, is the supplemental report coming?
Once it was identified that she had made that mistake, obviously she thought that they had made that mistake, thank you. And recognized after reviewing and looking at their video that this happened differently than what they had determined at the time, then we felt like it's our responsibility to correct the report to show what truly happened rather than leave in information that wasn't accurate.
That makes sense, but it wasn't done to try and cover her up.
Well, this was after the investigation. So yeah, no, this was after we had the records and all that kind of stuff. So that we had an accurate record in a police report, and it didn't show an inaccurate, it wasn't factual event.
It wasn't asked to be written so they could dismiss the allegation.
No, this was after the investigation.
That was the impression I got.
Okay, no, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean that they were told, write this and you'll get it dismissed. That was not my intention, but it's what it felt like to me.
Sorry. Feelings are not important.
Yeah.
No, feelings are not issues here.
I know that it's hard to stay on our three topics. It does seem like we're getting into the adjudication quite a bit with these two comments, and that's fine because it is hard to remember. But I do want to remind people that we're talking about policy and training recommendations. So I understand.
I have nothing to add.
So I'll hold my comments with regard to truthfulness and explain why I agree with Bernadette the next round. But with regard to training, there was I think it was Sergeant D who said that training needed to be more specific. Is that true?
I don't remember, but I believe you.
Okay, I think he said training needed to be more specific and it needed to occur more often, but it occurs quarterly. And so I'm not sure that it needs to, that needs to be looked into how, like what's the best cadence of training on a range of issues, because it wasn't just pursuits. And then I think that Sergeant D, because ultimately the decision to allow the pursuit to continue rested with the watch commander who we couldn't get in contact with. He only had a little bit about that. So I think that you could look into that policy and figure out what might be best, but also sergeants could use some more support. I think it felt like he didn't have support. I think those are my only two comments in policy.
Obviously, I think that there are certain officers involved who could use some training on traffic and what we were talking about tonight. So I'm glad to see that that is continuing. Another one that I would suggest looking at is how reports are filed and how officers are encouraged to think about their filing of their reports. And I would suggest that maybe they watch the video before they file their report. I know that timeliness is important, and a lot of times you're end of shift and you want to like get it in and you want to make sure that you're filing the report. But when we have all of this technology available to us, including the body worn, the in-car video, it seems like it would only benefit the officer to take a look at that before they write their report. It seems like it, I think that's standard, right?
Yeah, and I think what happened in this case, if I remember correctly, was that they had gone to the hospital with the person, and they started writing their report there. And so their body worn video was still running, and so you can't view that video until you've actually stopped it, and you can pull it up on your phone and watch it. So trying to be more efficient and using your time wisely when you're sitting there waiting for an update. And they felt like they knew what happened. So they chose to write the report there and then didn't review the video. But in a lot of cases, most cases, that would happen.
That would happen. Okay.
You do a video review, yeah.
At the scene, I mean, just argue with you a little bit.
Sure.
I think it was clear that Officer A didn't know what happened, because right before they meted, they were going around to all the officers and saying, did you ram the car? Did you ram it? Did you ram it? And
sure,
clearly they knew. They were using the term, did you ram it? Not, did you get rammed? So at that point, it seemed like they knew that some EPD officer had rammed the car, not the other way around. It's clear to me that they did not know what they were writing because of that. So it would have behooved them to review that, taking that extra time, and maybe be bored in the hospital for a little bit and read. That's just a training that I would suggest for this specific officer, and probably all of them. Yeah. But
I think this pertains to policy because, well, I'll just say it anyway. So going back to the changing or filing a new report, and I'm probably not using the right terminology, but the new report that was corrected, that did lead to a change in adjudication, didn't it? Did it not?
It did.
No, sorry, it wasn't a change in adjudication, right?
Adjudication memos the recommendations hadn't been made yet.
Was it?
Yeah.
Hey, the auditor had written her recommendation, or the assistant auditor, whoever had made a recommendation, and then the chief, the supplemental was filed, and then the chief said, oh, since she filed the since they filed, Officer A filed the supplemental, that should just go away. That is the sequence of what happened, I believe.
It's an unfair characterization of how that happened. And you have no idea what was going through the chief's mind at the time. And so I just would say that, for the record, I respectfully disagree with that comment.
I'm just saying timing only. We saw the auditor's memo that says there should be something, and then a supplemental was filed, and then we saw a chief's memo. I'm not making any judgments about the chief or what was in the chief's mind. I'm simply trying to, Clay was asking about the timing, and I'm offering my answer out of turn remotely, but that's the timing that I thought that should be pointed out. That's all.
Yeah, I think what I was gonna say is that it didn't change any of, like, it's not like we made a recommendation, we changed it after the supplemental was filed. But I haven't checked the dates, but that timing, I know it was during the adjudication timing when the supplemental was filed, so I'm not sure exactly what the timing was, but I'm sure Alan has looked at the dates.
What I'm going back to in my memory, which is not, a reliable thing always, as we all know, is that there was some statement about the opportunity for decision-making to change based on the filing of a supplemental report. And I assumed it was in this office,
Yeah.
not in the chief's office.
Yeah.
And to me, that I think it's important to examine like how that process was, what the policy is regarding making a report and then making a new report, and what it means to report something as part of a record versus what it means to correct something as part of an investigation. And, you know, I don't believe that this officer, I believe that there were a variety of activities happening in the moment that would have led to confusion. I don't think that's a problem that happens in all these circumstances, but I do wonder about the process of changing a record document in an investigation that leads to changes in decision making that I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but it's just concerning, I think, as a policy question. So that's kind of my statement on that. The other question that I had was, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Officer B made statements about either not being trained or feeling like they had no idea how to perform a pit maneuver, but was performing it, or made some statements about how they were using their vehicle strategically that were not in alignment with appropriate training. And so, not to say that they weren't trained and they forgot or didn't know what to do in the moment, but just I wanted to bring that up and ask about whether or not there is a record of that officer being trained in that discipline and how that plays in. I mean, obviously the allegation was sustained, so it's not really a concern in terms of discipline or in terms of action related to it, but that was a statement I was just curious about related to training.
I believe the officer said that he or she had training in pit maneuvering, but not like the actual ramming, like that was kind of winging it on the fly.
Yes.
Disrupting
but
forward motion.
There seemed to be a lot of confusion about what to do, whether there was a way that this could be done safely and a strategic way to do it. Or not.
Kind of got swept up in the moment. It's the way I read it. I can't speak for that officer, but that's the way I read it.
Okay.
I think the way I read it too was sort of, well, this isn't the specific thing I was trained in. Like I don't know. I read it as like, well, no, I never got training in this maneuver, but this was like my twist on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I.
Like the question was definitely going towards like, is this something you've ever been trained on? Like, no, dude, or person or whoever, right? And so again, going off memory in other cases too, right? So but that's, I hear what you're saying, but that my read of it was always just kind of like, this is not a maneuver you have been trained in, right? This is not a maneuver that's approved by the department. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so obviously I think that person could use some training.
Yeah.
If they want to perform that kind of maneuver in the future. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you, Clay. Yeah, I just thought it was to inform our decision. I believe the memo from the auditor said, like, had there been a supplemental or if there's a supplemental, I think Clay was hinting on this a minute ago, and then there was a supplemental, and then it's just a factual thing, and the chief referred to it in his memo and said it was done. So I don't see there's nothing to sustain or rule on here. So there was a dismissal, and I think I'm not suggesting anything is untoward about that. It's simply the timing. I think it goes to Bernadette's point that it appears as if a safe harbor was offered, as though the auditor's memo offered the officer a safe harbor. Please correct the record. I only want to point out that it's so important that report get corrected, because of course, like, that could be used in a sentencing for that person. It could be used in a release decision for that person. I mean, that violent act that that person didn't commit the record should not go uncorrected. And then so Officer A didn't call out a pursuit. Nobody called out a pursuit apparently. So that's a training issue. The next time they train pursuits, which I understand training's quarterly, but vehicles might only come up once a year or once that someone might correct if you know how often the vehicle stuff comes up. But and then Officer B, I agree, like didn't know what a pit maneuver was, it appeared to me. And so training, and even though he should have they should have been trained in pit maneuvers. They apparently did not know. And then the muted mic, if it's supposed to be tactical, it's not, it wouldn't be the situation. This was what happened. And then it's like turning off the black box in an airplane, in my view, just of, you know, in terms of like, we were deprived of information when it didn't seem to be for any kind of purpose other than to tell me what happened without being heard, caught on the microphone. So I think the training, if we're not supposed to be doing that, discipline or not for that issue, it's definitely a training issue. So those were my issues. Thank you.
Any other follow-up on policy and training before we move on to adjudication?
Just that I found it interesting that it wasn't the officers themselves did say that they did not have the training, but it was Sergeant D who was not at the scene who felt like there wasn't the appropriate training. And I don't know, I'm not aware that he has a skin in the game on that issue. So that was interesting.
All right, now we're going to do adjudication recommendations. And this, how do we want to do it tonight with so many different officers and so many different adjudications? Typically, we kind of have a turn to talk. What? Yeah. Usually we talk. Let's do a round of talking about adjudications generally, and then we'll go around and like do a show of hands for each individual. Is that good?
I think we can take C and D off the table, right? I mean, I think
maybe I think we should.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
let's
so let's do
let's
do a round of talking about all of the adjudication, and then we'll vote individually. Yes, Rick, you are first, please.
Okay. I agree that there's insufficient evidence on the first allegation regarding terminating this, or regarding initiating and or continuing the pursuit. I thought that it perhaps could have been more articulately alleged.
Okay.
So in other words, if you are arguing that it was negligent or wrong to initiate, then you need to have one for that and then another one for continuing after they learn.
Okay.
Because even though they're close, they're not exactly the same because things change during the course of the event.
Yeah, that's an I mean, it's, as you know, I'm trying to balance the interests, but I hear that. I definitely hear that.
Right. If I were representing the union on it, I would be driving all over the place, but I'm not. And with respect to the report by I think I agree that there's insufficient evidence on that. On C's pursuit, I think that should be sustained, or should be B's pursuit should be sustained for the ramming of the vehicle, right? Even though I believe that the officer probably thought that it was going to be successful, it wasn't, and that's the reason why the pit maneuvers are not taught that way. And it's more like bumper cars than anything else. And you can see that the vehicle rammed up against the curb on the right, and it could very well have disabled the vehicle at that point, but it didn't, and so it didn't work, and so that's the reason why it's not part of the policy. I thought that C's pursuit was within policy because C had no chance to. C was just following. There's no chance for C to stop the pursuit at some point because A is in pursuit. That's A's call at that point. And on D, I think there was insufficient evidence on D. The whole thing took a minute. You have no evidence at all about whether D even knew that the event was taking place during the course of the event. As far as we could tell, there were two sets of videos from D. one was in the office, and the next minute, D was on the scene. We have no idea whether D may have been on route from his desk to his car during the period of time that this 1 minute passed. So there's no way you can judge that he did anything wrong, or that person did anything wrong. So I agree with the education so far.
I also agree with the adjudication. I almost feel like Sergeant Deep, like maybe I should have said this in the classification section, but that I didn't feel that he, that there wasn't any misconduct on his part. I didn't think there was an appearance of misconduct. For the reasons that Alan stated, it was such a short period of time. He was not on the scene. He was not in one of the vehicles with. They were not in the vehicles with one of the officers, and he they made a good faithful effort to try and get in contact with the watch commander. And I think the specific allegation is that the officer didn't stop the pursuit, but the only person that can start a pursuit is the watch commander, right?
So any supervisor can I believe shoot.
Well, he can terminate,
yes.
But who can start? Only the watch commander, correct?
No, an officer can initiate their own pursuit, or the guidelines that DC talked about earlier in the training, so they can initiate their own pursuit. They can also terminate their own pursuit, and they can be terminated by any supervisor as well.
Okay, I guess I had a misunderstanding. I thought that he was calling the watch commander because he was trying to get his permission for the pursuit. So I thought that there was no need for him to. I didn't think there was an obligation for him to stop the pursuit because it wasn't officially started, I thought, but yeah, perhaps it was. But I don't think that I agree with the adjudication with insufficient evidence. I don't think there should have been a thing to begin with. And back to truthfulness, I think that if Officer A had said on the scene that I thought Officer B was right, but then later on changed their story to the truth, that wouldn't have been an issue, and maybe it was a mistake they were confused or whatnot. But I think the fact that they doubled down and were continuing on with that story, and maybe they felt that they had to do that, but nonetheless, I think that was blatantly untrue, and I think that the adjudication should have been there was sufficient. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot to say. I think I've said what I want to say, but I think that the first allegation is a tricky one where all three parties, the chain of command, chief, and auditor, disagree. And I think it's so nuanced, and I think listening to Rick talk about it kind of explains to me why it's so nuanced and why, how you all three could get to a totally different endpoint. And I think I was definitely going to go sustained, but then hearing that it is. I appreciate the separation of starting and continuing. I think that if that had been looked at, maybe it would have been easier to kind of come to an agreement on those. Ooh. So anyway, but
yeah, I tend to agree with exactly what you just said.
Really?
About that.
I don't even know what I
well, it's that I find there to be an issue that in the moment, as the pursuit is continuing to engage and things sort of continue to escalate because of the pursuit, I would say there should be a moment of recognition of this is more dangerous than it's worth. And there is a threat to people and vehicles and property and stuff. I mean, most importantly, people. And that the process of that happening escalated from the moment it started, and it continued to escalate with every action. And there needs to be a point at which you call it. And it's so fast that there's not a lot of time to say that this is the moment when you call it. But at the same time, I think there was a moment. And to me, it was when that car pulled into the parking lot, which has no way out except for an exit. And the only way they got out because they were being pursued was through an alleyway that has a bollard in it. And if an officer has a sense of downtown, which I think that officer probably does, they know the landscape to a certain extent that they should be able to make some decision making about what the risk is versus the opportunity for I guess terminating the situation successfully. And so I agree that if it maybe had been pulled apart in two, it could have been maybe more easily decipherable. But because it is the whole process of the vehicle pursuit, at the beginning of that, I can see how the culmination of information led to a pursuit. And so it's a hard one, which again is why there's maybe three different views on it. Yeah, I think I need to understand this a little bit more. Can I borrow this?
Yeah.
Okay. So for accurate report and evidence submission, thank you for pointing out the sentences that I was trying to remember. That it's, okay. Yeah, so this is from the auditor.
Yes.
So this is from the auditor's report, which says, or not report, but memo. It appears that submitting a supplemental report explaining the circumstances which led to the inaccuracies of the initial report could be a sufficient remedy here and potentially render this allegation unnecessary. And in the chief's memo, similarly, it says, there was a mistake made basically by officer and that person has since submitted a supplemental report, and I concur with the auditor that this allegation is therefore unnecessary. So to me, like,
yeah.
So it's basically like this. I am not saying that the officer lied, but what it is appearing is happening is that the officer made a factual inaccuracy in a report, later said the factually accurate thing, and therefore it's dismissed in the beginning.
Yeah, I can.
And that,
yeah.
To me, is weird.
Oh yeah, no.
And so, like for the report, Alan said it well. I think that there needs to be factual accuracies in the report, so I don't have any problem with filing this supplemental report.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to make of
what
that because it's still a sustained finding by the auditor, and that's what I would agree with. But then it was. There's some agreement about how it should be dismissed.
I can definitely speak to this. And it's
okay, great.
Okay. So in this one, and I want to be clear that this was one where Lindsay was lead on this investigation. She did a great job. She was in the interviews and all of that. And then at the adjudication point, she had it all written, and then I put it in that sentence that we're all focusing on. That's fine. I'm just taking ownership of that right now. Don't go bothering her with that one. This is me. So basically, when I was. This is one of those where I ended up a bit tortured at the end, right? So it's tough when you look at these and you see, okay, like the material that came in at the beginning, right, is this video, this oh god video that we need to watch, and then this report and PC affidavit that's just like, this is not right, this is not true, right? And so I felt, my avenues, my tools for getting to the bottom of those types of things is to bring an allegation, do an investigation, and go for it, right? You guys have seen this a few times, right? So then we go through this investigation, and through the interview and through, like, there is an explanation for why there were inaccuracies in that report, and my reading of the investigation was I didn't see any element of willfulness, I didn't see any malintent, I didn't see anything that led me to believe this was anything other than a mistake. And as far as those comments about like who's ramming, to me that was excited utterance. She's in a stressful situation. I didn't really see that as evidence of knowledge so much. To me, that was this person's kind of freaked out, right? So we get to the end, and all I can say is, well, yes, the report, and I want to be clear, this was a report writing allegation, not a truthfulness allegation. They're sort of getting to the same world, right? But I just want to be clear on that. So we have an inaccurate report, right? Like 100%. And the way it's written and the policy is written, it's like, well, yes, I think there is an inaccurate report filed that is the basis for potential criminal prosecution, right? That's not okay. So I have to sustain this allegation. At the same time, for someone to have a sustained report writing allegation on their record is problematic, right? It's very problematic. And so I was sort of in this place where I was really torn about, I don't see bad intent here. I don't see a bad officer here, but there's a problem that needs to be fixed. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I basically wrote that as an off-ramp, right? Of if the problem gets fixed, I don't see an honesty issue here, and a sustained allegation would read as dishonesty. So that's kind of where I ended up and where I was torn. And the path I chose So, and
That's
of course,
helpful.
I come here for public meetings, and you guys can give me feedback on the paths that I choose. So I hope, yeah.
That's helpful context.
Okay.
I don't have other comments.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really helpful, because it was a safe harbor. I mean, that's what was offered and that's what was taken, and it's fine, you know, and an insight into why, understanding that an officer's career could be seriously hindered with allegations of untruthfulness or borderline, you know, bad report writing. So that is very helpful to understand. I think I'm generally on board with the adjudications. I think it illustrates that a minute and a half or however long it is, it's so important for the individual officer decision-making, and that I really am sympathetic to Sergeant D, who was put in who you know, owned it. They owned it. But they also said, hey, there was a minute and a half, and as Rick pointed out, had to go from office to vehicle to field. So very hard to call off something that isn't even called by the line officers as a pursuit, the perception by the sergeant. So and as far as and truthfulness, I'm going to defer to the line. You know, the people who made these decisions have to have faith in the truth. It's fundamental that the officer is toast if there's a reputation for untruthfulness. So if the line investigators believe that this wasn't to change, you know, it did take too long to correct the record. That gives rise to the whole discussion tonight, that and to Bernadette's point that it took a really long time for the supplemental should have been filed as soon. The training should be, if you realize you made a mistake about a factual thing that's a huge fact that justifies the entire reason for the pursuit, you should probably correct it right away. So thank you all for listening.
I think with regards to Officer B, disrupting the forward movement of the vehicle officer. I mean, I think that if we're going to talk about there wasn't bad intent on Officer A's report writing having a mistake in it, I don't think there's ill intent on Officer B either.
No.
You know, in pushing, you know, the attempt was to push the vehicle. I think probably thought it was just going to push it up against the curb and it would just stay there, right?
Yeah.
But then off the curb and went on. So
sorry, go ahead.
No.
No, I think that's a really good point. And I just want to say that, well, two things. One is there wasn't an easily available remedy for having chosen to ram the vehicle that we could get to.
Push.
Right. What?
Push the vehicle.
Sure. Okay.
I think it was self-identified as ram.
No, but I guess I want to say that I would say I don't typically always require any kind of willfulness requirement, right? There's no mental state requirement when we're doing these adjudications in general. In practice, I would say things that are, you know, untruthfulness, the heavy hitters, right? In practice, that seems to be where we go.
While I understand the perspective and I appreciate it, I also think that you can have just as much damage done by an unintentional lie, an unintentional push, ram, you know, poor pursuit decision making. I mean, all of these things, you know, come, you know, down to the same thing. It's like we expect our officers to be really thinking out there, right? And not thinking about the consequences always of their actions. I mean, in the end, because then they become too safe and they, you know, it's like, oh, I can't do anything because I might get in trouble. I mean, we don't want that, right? And so I understand that concern that it's like, we want them to be decision makers. We want them to be good decision makers. And I think this just illustrates that the more they're on the streets, the better their decisions become, which is why the Officer C with 13 years said, this is not a good situation. Look at all of these cars, look at all of these people walking around. This is just not a good situation. And so, you know, and then you've got Officer B with 8 years, you know, who I think I read was a bike officer downtown at some point. So, yes, very clearly understood the terrain as to what was going on. And I think had good instincts. But obviously now, it's like got pulled into something, and is, now has a sustained allegation. And then the officer that started the whole thing, Officer A, I think had good instincts, light up when they're going into a parking lot, crowded parking lot, lots of parking spots, everybody figures they're gonna pull over. But, I think that the splitting the hairs, or not splitting the hairs necessarily, I mean, piecing it out, the pursuit, the calling of the pursuit and the continuing of the pursuit. I don't know that we would be in a different situation here, even if these were split out into different ones. I think we would still be kind of going, well, which part was the bad part? Because, was it really called as a pursuit? Are there magic words that have to be said when it's a pursuit? I know the time will go on, but so I still come back to, I think the time for the supplemental report was back in March when the first thing got opened. I don't think it was appropriate to dismiss this based on the supplemental in July. I think sometimes those are things that come down to how, after it's sustained, what kind of ramifications happen afterwards, whether it's a reprimand, whether there's some more punishment. But that's where I stand on it. So.
Okay, so we're gonna go around and just go allegation by allegation. So for allegation 1, Officer A, vehicle pursuit. Chain of command said within policy, the chief said insufficient evidence and the auditor said sustained. So,
good luck.
Money. Would you agree with that?
I agree with the auditor.
But
I just, it dawned on me that we're having an awful lot of discussion. And some of that discussion, and the reason I'm here is because there's a disagreement. And I would just encourage you to avail yourself of being able to ask me what was going through my mind, and be able to add some of the context of why I went down a certain path. I mean, certainly that's your choice if you don't want to ask me, but I think that was the whole point of inviting me was to be able to give you some insight into why I made some adjustments or how I look at these things that may be differently than the way the auditor looks at things. So whether or not that results in any questions, I don't know, but I just want to let you know that's the purpose of me is a commitment that when there's a disagreement between us and the auditors, that I'm going to try and get here as often as I can so that you can have access to me and better understand kind of that decision making.
Thank you for that. It's new, so
I know,
yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Here we go.
Well, yeah, I definitely.
Give them an opportunity.
Before I vote, I definitely want to choose to say.
I would love to share a few thoughts because I find myself sitting here wanting to engage and sometimes I'm not as patient as I should be. A couple of thoughts, not on any specific order based on the conversation I heard. The supplemental report and the adjudication are 100% mutually exclusive. While the auditor does not have to look at this through the lens of willful, ORS 236-350 under just cause specifically articulates willfulness when you're going through the disciplinary process. At the time for me on this particular issue, first of all, let me say is truthfulness is a very serious thing. It's career-ending type of allegation. And so I take that very seriously when I think about sustaining truthfulness is I have to be willing to then follow that up with a disciplinary recommendation of termination. And that happens quite often. That's why I take it very seriously. In this particular case, I have to think about at the time and place based on the evidence that we have. Did the officer willfully write a false police report or willfully untruthful in their police report at that particular time? And the evidence suggested to me that officer wrote the report in a timely manner to suggest that the information that they put into the report was what they believed to be true and factual at the time, regardless of when the supplemental report occurred. The other thing I would say about supplementals is supplementals will be written 100% of the time that we find that a report is inaccurate, whether it's this situation or your burglary call that we happen to get something wrong as a victim. We will go back and correct that, whether it's a week later or 6 months later, it will be corrected 100% of the time. That's just our obligation to do that. But they are mutually exclusive. One did not inform the other. As a matter of fact, I can't even honestly tell you that until I read the some of the final discussion with Leah that when the supplemental even came in. But my decision on that particular case around truthfulness was predicated on what the officer reasonably perceived at the time when that officer wrote the report. And again, I can't emphasize enough that truthfulness is a career-ending type of allegation, if sustained. With regards to the pursuit, which is the other disconnect where I had insufficient evidence, we're not far apart on this between myself and Lindsay, the auditor, on this. However, I did take in the totality of the circumstances. When you think about, as articulated, a young officer who is engaged or chooses to engage in a pursuit, and I think that we were in agreement that at that moment, the initiation of the traffic stop was warranted. I went out and actually drove the course. It's 600 feet from the point that they initiated it to the point that it stopped. I drove that this morning or this afternoon before I came over here just to refresh my recollection, because I drove it before I made the adjudication. It took me seconds to get from 7th and Olive to the alleyway where they turned. In that time, the way the policy reads is they have to be able to articulate that terminating the pursuit is in the best interest based on the totality of the dangerous. And I would suggest that that short period of time is at best for a seasoned officer difficult to take in that much input and make a decision, let alone a younger officer that's doing this. The last piece of this is as they turn into the alleyway, the speeds were such, and this person was obviously trying to get away because of the way they were trying to do their car. The termination of that pursuit could have absolutely happened, but you would expect that officer to continue. If that car had crashed, you would have expected that officer to re-engage. You would have expected that officer. So I think the apprehension of that person was important at that point as a result of how robustly they were demonstrating their ability or desire to get away to the point where they wrecked their car, knocked over bollards, and are going over those types of things. But I don't think there was anything in the record that suggested to me that the pursuit was pushing that person, much like many other pursuits do, let alone the speeds that the officer was driving, which was not necessarily unreasonable. I've seen downtown speeds in excess of 30 miles an hour all the time, quite frankly. So based on the totality of that circumstance and the short time frame in which they were doing it, their ability to try to assimilate the information, be able to make a good rational decision to discontinue, unlike the second car, who is not wrapped up in being the primary car. If you've ever been the primary car, it is nerve-wracking. Number two, has the ability to have a much wider field of vision and make better decisions. That's why oftentimes the second car in a pursuit is always calling the pursuit, while the primary car is focused on driving and not operating the radio because of that dynamic. And the other complementary piece to this is it was so short, it was so compressed that we even found insufficient evidence for the supervisor who didn't even have enough information to even know there was a pursuit. And yet we're going to find it sustained that this officer engaged in the pursuit. So based on the totality of the circumstances and the inability to, I think, process that information as quickly as we would expect in 600 feet, I found insufficient evidence to suggest that it was an out of policy pursuit. I'm not suggesting the pursuit didn't happen, and I'm not suggesting the pursuit was 100% rock solid. I'm just suggesting that I didn't have enough information to feel like I could sustain that based on those particular incidents. So thank you for letting me share a couple of thoughts as you guys are having these conversations. And I will be happy to do this anytime that we aren't in agreement. Doesn't happen very often, but in the event that it does, I'm happy to come and share those thoughts. And we don't have to agree. We certainly understand that, and we can and have different points of view. And I respect all those different points of view as we're going through this process.
Thank you, Chief. When as the chair, I get to pick what cases we do, and I always go for the ones where there's disagreement because I feel like this is important, and I really appreciate that you're here to share your side, because that's what I always want. I want to hear everything because I want it to be clear that it's not like us against them in any sense of this. So I appreciate that. Also, Thank you.
It'll come to you.
They will. And it's not even my turn to talk.
As we're riding down the elevator.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, just when you all agree, it just feels, I was talking to Ryan earlier, it just seems like we're just, okay, kumbaya, like, why are we here? So I think
you
that
guys always find stuff.
we do, but I think that this is the most interesting is when there's disagreement, so.
Well, I would agree, and I think what it does is it provides opportunity for all of us to grow and learn. Certainly my lens after 33 years of doing this job is going to be different than your lens. I totally get that. I have experiential things going through my brain where I can almost immediately transport myself into that officer's shoes in many situations, and all of us can. And you don't have the benefit of that. And I understand that. And the challenge is yet we're asking you to look at this through what the officer reasonably perceived at that time, which is sometimes hard to do unless you've been in those circumstances. So that's the challenges we have with all of this. And, you know, like I said, we agree a ton on many things. And where we don't necessarily agree early on, we spend a lot of time talking about that. But I do think the disagreements need to happen. If nothing but coming and having a very robust discussion and looking at this from a 360-degree perspective, and where it lands. But I do think that we have a chance to impart knowledge and wisdom both directions. Yours for me and me to you, hopefully, as we kind of look at some of these cases, because eventually we're going to have a tough one, like a really tough one. This one doesn't feel like a tough one. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. And when we do that, we'll really have to lean on that relationship.
And I think the flip side of your coin of having your experience is that I think it's valuable for you and the other people in your department to hear what
100%.
What we have to say as the civilians and the people out there.
And I experienced that here. I experienced that in the police commission a ton, where we get to hear the different perspectives and how that things are perceived or maybe land differently, because we do have specific lines in law enforcement for sure.
All right. Are we ready to do the adjudication stuff? Okay.
Yeah, before we vote, I just want to say that I think this is like city government at its best, and I appreciate having a chief who's interested in investing in this relationship because of perhaps future cases that you just touched on.
So for allegation one,
She had one more thing. I think she had.
I thought so. I was anticipating. I was keying you up. Allegation one, vehicle pursuit. Within policy from chain of command, chief, insufficient evidence, auditor, sustained.
Right, I agree with the auditor.
I agree.
It's not a concept. You don't have to say thank you.
She just did it well.
That's not how there's validating.
Thank you, and I'm sorry all the time. So
I agree with the chief.
Thank you. So we have a whiteboard right there. One.
we're just on the pursuit.
You're just on one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I also agree with you.
Alan agrees with the chief as well.
The chief is insufficient evidence.
Yes.
I agree with that.
I agree.
All right. Two, this is also Officer A, accurate report. Did you just gloat?
No, he was giving me a thumbs up. I was waving her off.
Officer A, allegation two, accurate report and evidence submission, chain of command sustained, chief dismissed, auditor sustained.
Kind of sustained.
Kind of, yeah.
This dismissal was in consultation with
Yeah, I think
our
we were.
auditor. I think we're more in alignment.
But the paperwork says sustained, right?
Well, we get to that. We wouldn't even have to look at the paper.
It says sustained,
Okay.
yes, it does, sorry, no, I'm trying to, no, but I think it was sustained. Because here's
reservation.
one more thing, sorry, just real quick. I don't have the option at the close of an investigation to dismiss anything,
Because you're not the chief. Yeah.
because I'm not the chief. He can dismiss things, but I can't at that point.
And I think that's why
I
my
can in the
memo, I tried to
beginning, you have
articulate that it
to
was
dismiss this.
consultation.
I think I would.
So why did you do sustained instead of insufficient evidence?
Because I think there was absolutely sufficient evidence that the report was inaccurate.
But that it didn't need to be a sustained thing on their record. That's what you're saying.
Like
At what point can you dismiss?
I can dismiss at the beginning. I can dismiss for lack of timeliness. I can dismiss because there's no policy violation. I can dismiss because there's an alternate remedy available. I can dismiss because we've already looked at it. I can dismiss other, which usually means I can't understand what this complaint is alleging. So it's actually set out in an ordinance and then also in the protocol, specific things that I can dismiss for at the beginning.
once, but when we say at the beginning, what does the beginning mean?
Like at classification, I classify it, I dismiss it.
So if you classified this as the report writing as wrong, and let's say just even a week goes by and a supplemental came in, would you dismiss that?
I think I would still have to, I would have to ask him to.
What I would say would happen is we would go through the entire investigation and then once we had all of the pieces of information. Because there would still, even if the supplemental came in a week later, we would still want to ask the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
We would still want the officer to be able to answer for what they reasonably perceived at the time when they wrote the report, because it would be shocking what officers are actually tell you. And so I think we would want to go through that. At least my sense is I would want all the information before I would suggest a dismissal with the auditor.
It's pretty rare that once something has launched, that it will get dismissed before the close.
Okay, well then.
I'm sorry.
I don't know what I'm gonna say.
Well,
but,
I don't know either. I didn't set it up for you.
I was gonna say insufficient evidence, but you're right, there is significant evidence, so that's not accurate either. I definitely have problems with it. But hearing this conversation, I guess I would agree with
Us both.
you both.
Yeah, likewise. Whatever the
Whatever
current
that
outcome is. Yeah.
It seems like I don't know why this is so problematic that there was an offer made in the memo and it was accepted and it was acted upon, and I don't find any problem with that, and I go with the chief.
I still would assist it.
I go with the chief. I think the allegation has some errors in it that you've alleged that the officer A failed to submit a true and accurate complete report.
But they submitted an untrue and accurate report.
That's different. And
I'm gonna suck you in.
submitting a report is not the same as submitting a probable cause affidavit. The policy doesn't address that.
True, it doesn't.
So that shouldn't even be part of the discussion.
Okay.
But I go with the chief.
So are we on the second allegation? Okay, I agree with the other.
Thank you.
All right, the final three, just because we're 10 minutes to the end,
I promise.
everybody agreed on everything. So maybe just a show of hand, do you agree that for Officer C, the third one, vehicle pursuit within policy, just like show your hand if you agree with all three of the people?
Alan's
Yes.
raising his hand.
Okay, and then allegation 4 for Officer B, the forcible stop, everybody sustained. Do you agree with everything for that?
Yes.
And then the final.
Do you need a clarification on that?
I think I'm fine. I was a bit confused, but I think I'm fine.
And D, vehicle pursuit, everyone said insufficient evidence for the
Sergeant D.
Sergeant D.
Correct.
Does everybody agree with insufficient evidence?
Yes.
It's okay if you don't, I should have said that. Can we push the election to next time?
Can you?
I move that we postpone the election of the other positions until our next meeting.
Thank you. Auditor report.
Oh,
I had moved that we postpone the other.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do it. Everybody,
Second, all in favor.
all in favor?
Is there
Alan.
any discussion?
Alan, you're raising your hand
Are you
to
okay?
postpone. Okay, you're gonna go one more time to police commission at least.
Okay.
Auditor.
Audit report, I
I thought
will
I
submit
moved
it
it.
in writing. Lindsay made me a beautiful template that had graphs on it, and it turned out it's really hard for me to write less. So I have been delayed, but I will email an audit report. Basically, we're getting a lot of complaints. We have new space, public portal's up and running. People are using it. It's fantastic. It's wonderful. Thank you Chief, for coming. I'm gonna be at council next Wednesday talking about potential areas for growth for civilian oversight. I can keep you posted on that. That's it. I don't want to keep you here any later.
Okay, closing comments. Leah did have a good idea for ride-alongs that we can email everybody.
Yes, I have actually, wait, I have 2 closing comments, even though I'm not really allowed to. Okay, one is just a philosophical note around this, sorry. But in talking about sort of the adjudication for this one and sort of where we went with this, one of the things that I am constantly coming back to is how do I use the tools that I have in this position to work towards change behavior, right? Like if we can all agree that the behavior at the beginning is something we don't necessarily want to happen more than once, just how do we get to change behavior? And especially in this case, I felt like sort of doing the hammer of a sustained inaccurate report thing was not the way to get change behavior, right? Like, do I think that potentially this officer has learned from this? Yes, I hope so, right? So that's just, you'll see that in how I classify things and how I write allegations, what I focus on, and in my recommended adjudication. So just wanted to touch on that. The idea that Carolyn was talking about is we talked about doing ride-alongs over the December break. I know some of you took part in some, and that's fine. I also wanted to, oh my gosh, I can't remember my words. I also wanted to make sure to let you know that there's the option of dispatch ride-alongs, which are super interesting. I've done them a couple of times, and you can go and literally just sit next to the person who's dispatching. So you can listen to call takers, like you can sit next to the call takers, and then there's someone who's trying to coordinate all the things. It's daunting. There's lots of screens. It's really cool. And the call taking is phenomenal what people deal with, right? And so I just highly recommend that, especially I know some people have discomfort around going out and being, you know, there's a safety element to going and being in a patrol car all night. I get it. But you don't have that at dispatch. So if you're interested in that, let us know. I think that was it, right? That was it. Okay, cool.
I don't have any closing comments except thank everybody for being here. I'm so glad it's in person. Thank you, Chief, especially for coming. You're coming back because.
Well, thank you for the grace, and we'll kind of fine tune my role in this. I know it's kind of a new thing. We can maybe think about, Lee and I can maybe think about how we integrate me. That's a little bit has a better rhythm to it than just that.
Yeah.
But I'm here from a good place of just wanting to be vulnerable and open up kind of just my thought process on many of these things. And again, we may not agree on that, which is 100% fine. But I do think that hopefully it's helpful just to hear from me on some specific cases. So
glad to be in person. Yeah. And thank you, Chief. Thank you, Deputy Chief, for the training topic too. So that's, yeah, looking forward to the next time. Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you. I want to thank the Chief. I think there was a lack of clarity a little bit perhaps around your role, or you probably would have been asked more, and maybe something in the shape of Prime Minister's questions or something, where at the, you know, when we're at the adjudication phase, we get you at the table and we get to ask the questions, but it was very useful to hear your insights. And I think that I'm not speaking for anyone else, but for me, it did not occur to me to directly, you know, ask you a question simply from a procedural thing. So we'll get clarity around that, but thank you for your time, and thank you, Deputy Chief, for your time and for the training, and everybody else. And that's it. Thank you.
Now I get you twice a month now, is that right?
If you come to this, everybody.
I don't know, like it sounded a little bit like Bernadette maybe has a different plan, but yes, I do. You do get me for the time being, apparently. Yes.
I appreciate that we're all in person. I always appreciate live testimony and, you know, telling us how to do things. I think we didn't ask questions because we're so used to Sergeant Nelson, who's been doing this for eons, and God willing, he continues to do it for a few more eons because we've just got used to him. And so, but now that we know you're here, we'll certainly grill you as much as we can. What I have always appreciated about the Civilian Review Board over the Police Commission is the give and take, that we are here to inform the police and the police are here to inform us. And then we go back out and talk with our community members about, you know, well, this is why the police did this and this, you know, and so it was like, when the pursuit policy changed because they were pursuing cars down the bike path near 18th and Chambers.
Railroad tracks.
No, I didn't care about the railroad tracks so much, but bike paths was a little bit unnerving. I mean, and so it's like, you know, and that we saw, it's like, you know, the previous chief, it's like, as soon as that incident happened, you know, he put in place policy changes until it could be completely reviewed by the police commission. And so I think what I've always appreciated over my many years of doing this in the police commission is that it's not a step-by-step process. It's like something needs to change now, so it gets changed. And every day I read the news, I just kind of go, I am so glad for the police department that we have and the people that live in our community that care about, the police and themselves. And that, I mean, that we're not Atlanta right now, Memphis, wherever it was. I can lose track of all of them because there's so many of them. And so I appreciate that you take the time to come, and that you have to be here.
I join in thanking the chief for being here. The one thing that struck me about this whole thing, watching all that video, I don't know how many hours it was, but it was a lot, was one supervisor whose name I did not pick up, ran around the block, around Cascade Title, all the way around and came up on the other side of the park blocks. And when that person stopped, there was a canine officer sitting there with his dog just waiting. No one rushed in from the park blocks. No one came in with their guns drawn. No one did anything that would aggravate this, whoever it was. And I thought to myself, that's really good police. Because that dog was going to stop anybody who ran out of there. And everybody stayed back from that opening. And I thought, that's really a good job. And I think police department ought to be commended for the way they handled it.
Well, they take commendations too.
And we just put them on the record. Say them at the beginning. Good job.
Also the public portal.
That's all I have.
I'm also grateful that the chief's here. We were in the elevator together. I did not realize I was in the elevator.
I'm not as scary as I did.
I think I think your presence here demonstrates how meaningful this process is, how meaningful and serious the work that we do here is. And so I'm just appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of the police department, or of a police department where internal complaints are generated internally. I think that means something. That's all I had.
One of my favorite parts about in-person meetings is I can leave all of my notes here for public record law. So I encourage anyone else to do the same. It's much easier now. You can take it all.
No, but that's your reading at the beginning.
It's going to change every month. That's true.
Yeah, it's definitely good.
You need to know.
It's not going to be long.
Scan it.
That's what we,
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Move to adjourn.
we move to adjourn.
You don't have to move. You just
Adjourn. Okay, we're adjourned.
Bye.
And the recording?
Do you have suggestions?